All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nikos Vettas. I'm the General Director of IOBE in Athens. We are privileged today to have for a very important discussion for Greece, for Germany, and for Europe, to think collectively about the way forward for industry. We have with us the Minister for Growth and Investments of Greece, Mr. Adonis Georgiadis, and we have the heads of the German Federation and the Greek Federation of Industries. So what better way to really think a little bit beyond the day-to-day management of things, because the day-to-day management of things, I guess the minister would also tell us, is extremely demanding, but we do need to prepare because there will be a next day, and it's up to us to make it a much better next day. Before anything else, let me give the floor to Henri Bonnet, who on behalf of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation is going to welcome us.
Thank you, Nico. Kalispera, good afternoon to everybody. Dear Minister Georgiadis, dear Professor Russwurm, dear Mr. Papalexopoulos, it's a pleasure to have you all here today on this important talk. Today, almost every economy as we know in the world is in deep economic crisis. With schools, restaurants, and shops closed, public life is almost at a standstill. Every week of lockdown costs our economies millions and makes recovery even harder. But I think there's hope, and we all think there's hope. Private enterprises have proven in the crisis once again that they can adapt and innovate and take the opportunities that present themselves. The free market is not dead. On the contrary, it has pushed creativity and innovation. The vaccines, now active against COVID-19, are the proof of innovation of the innovative forces of the market. So, with this positive view in mind, we want to discuss today the strength of private business and to see how Germany and Greece has fared so far through the crisis, and especially in the side of the industries, and how they look into the future. I'm delighted to have such a high-level panel here today with the BDE and the CEF on board. Thank you very much for the cooperation. Minister Georgiadis, thank you so much for being with us today as well. I also want to thank Nico Vettas for the moderation, and of course my colleague Martha Konto-Damon, who organized this all. And I wish us all a very good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Henri. So let's jump into the topic then. From where I'm sitting, every economy in Europe is going through a deep recession, which is natural given the pandemic. Unemployment has kept itself reasonably low, but that's because of the support measures. Technology has accelerated in many aspects of the economy. But the next day is going to be challenging and interesting. And the first one to open the discussion is going to be Minister Georgiadis. So what are your first thoughts on this? How do you see the next day?
First of all, I want to thank Konrad Adenauer Institution for the invitation, and personally my friend Henry. All these years, Henry, you are in Greece. I think you have a very good time here, an interesting time, but you were always very, very helpful to us and to our previous seat in the opposition and now in the government to try to find common ways to do things better between Greece and Germany, our relationship, our economy, and everything. So I want to say that today's event is important, and it comes in a very good timing. Because now we're exiting this pandemic crisis, that's what we hope. Vaccination is going very fast now in Greece. From today, even faster. We think that in the next 1.5 months, the most, our life will not be ordinary and normal exactly, but it will be much, much better than it was 1 year ago. And our economy will be ready again to start working in a much more normal way. So this is the time to discuss how we think the future should be. And I have to tell as a comment in the beginning of our discussion that the first statistics from our National Statistic Institution, Elstat, that they were published on Friday, gives us an opportunity to be a little bit more optimistic about the future than we would be some time ago. Our economy managed to stand on 2020 under these really severe conditions. I will give us an example. For the whole 2020, the industry production was just 2.1% below than 2019, which I think was a very good performance for Greece. And overall, the recession of 8.2% was reasonable enough for a year that our main industry, which is tourism, was severely hit by the pandemic in a way that nobody could ever predict it before the pandemic crisis. So I think that during 2020, we showed some flexibility. I will give you an example. When the crisis began on March, we didn't know we would have antiseptic for our hands or masks for our faces. Very fast, our industry was reorganized. The government helped in the bureaucratic level. And now we produce all the antiseptic we need and all the masks we need internally in our industries, which was a small miracle for Greece, how fast this happened and how fast our industry adjusted. So I think that the future, if we work properly and we use European funding and the normal European funding, but also the recovery fund in a proper way. And in this field, our cooperation with SEV and Mr. Papalexopoulos is very important to find a way to use this money in the proper way to re-establish industry in Greece, go to 4.0 revolution and a more innovation and digital time, which I think it's a common space in the European level. So 2020 was an interesting year, a difficult year, but we stand. Here we are, and 2021 and 2022 and the years to come is an opportunity, if we do our job, to create a new Greece. So this is for the opening remarks, and I will come back again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. Let's turn to the German view. How is the situation? How has the situation evolved the last year? But especially how things look ahead. So, Dr. Russwurm.
Thank you, Mr. Vettas. Dear Minister Georgiadis, dear Mr. Papalexopoulos, ladies and gentlemen, we have been living with the corona pandemic for about 1 year now. For our economic life, the outbreak of the pandemic has brought many hard cuts, and I think it's an excellent point in time to reflect, to look at the impact on our economies and on our expectations for the future. This calendar year has just started as the last one ended, full of uncertainty. Some data from the German economy. The German gross domestic product fell by 4.9%. This was the sharpest decline since 2009. Back then, the decline was 5.7%. More worrying is that the exports plummeted by 9.4%, and our industrial production fell down by 9.9% compared to 2019. And the slump was particularly severe in the automotive industry. The manufacturers of cars and car parts produced 1/4 less than 1 year earlier. Currently, the industry in Germany is running, unlike last spring when the pandemic started. But retail, trade, and gastronomy are in lockdown since December last year, and many cultural institutions, artists, actors, and musicians with their supporting staff are out of business since long. The outlook for many businesses in the German economy remains still negative, and we expect insolvencies and unemployment probably to increase. For this year, 2021, in a kind of best case scenario, we expect the GDP growth in the order of 3.5%, and hopefully exports will increase by 6%. This means that a return to the pre-crisis level will take at least until the second half of 2022. And again, this might be the best case. As indeed, every forecast for our economic development comes with a question mark. It depends on whether our international supply chains hold, the EU's internal borders remain open, and production in industrial plants continues. These risk factors are real. The experience with Corona has shown the vulnerability of our internationally networked value chains. Bottlenecks in the supply of primary products can bring production to a standstill literally within hours. National solo efforts, such as closing the borders between Germany and the Czech Republic, or Germany and Austria, or Germany and France, must be avoided. We urgently need Europe-wide coordination. We also need a clear perspective on how to contain the pandemic. After 1 year, we should have sufficient data for reasonable predictions if we allow to use this data properly. In turn, predictability and reliability are a necessary basis for companies to be able to plan for the longer term. Only then companies will trigger the investments we urgently need to get out of the crisis mode and into growth mode. And this applies not only to Germany, of course, but also to the rest of Europe. Some countries have been hit even harder than Germany. France, Italy, Spain experienced a substantial recession with a decrease of their GDP between 8 and 11%. And for sure, we know that Greece has been hit particularly hard due to huge losses in the tourism sector. In addition to all the support measures at the national level that help to cushion the consequences at least a little, we need a common European response. It is all the more important that the EU member states and the European Commission have agreed on a reconstruction program, Next Generation EU. The funds of 750 billion euros and the financial means from the multi-annual financial framework of around 1 trillion euros are urgently needed to overcome the crisis and to carry out important tasks for the future of Europe. They can significantly advance economic reconstruction on our continent through jointly financed measures. Investments in climate protection, in the digital economy, and our national health systems must be made now and trigger a digital and ecological transformation in our countries. And wherever possible, our businesses should work together to do this on a European scale across borders. And yes, we need to implement our national plans. I know that Greece has presented a comprehensive plan for investments in the area of green and digital transition, in education, but also in modernization of public administration and justice. And I'm sure that this lays a good foundation for increasing competitiveness and investment and overcoming the consequences of the crisis. As a European partner, we seek the support and we want to support our colleagues, especially in Greece. But to be perfectly honest, I am less enthusiastic about the German recovery program. It essentially contains the national economic stimulus measures, which were already envisaged, plus 3 important projects of common European interests, where the short-term impact still needs to be seen. But nevertheless, entrepreneurs are notorious optimists. So despite all criticism, all the difficulties and uncertainties, I am convinced that we can emerge stronger from the crisis if we set the right course towards growth now. And Dimitri, I know that we are on the same page when it comes to the optimism of entrepreneurs. Thank you so much.
You opened up a number of issues, like the minister also before you. In fact, there is an interesting asymmetry. The ministry gave the number for how much industrial production shrunk in Greece, which is much, much less than how much it shrunk in Germany. On the other hand, the industrial sector in Germany is a much larger part of the economy than it is in Greece, which basically means, should we expect this to be reversed as we get out of the crisis? In any event, Mr. Papalexopoulos, what is the outlook for the Greek industry?
Thank you for that. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Dr. Russwurm. Thank you, Nico. Let me build on the notion of optimism that was brought up, but I would like, before doing that, to preface my statement by saying that we are clearly in a crisis, in a pandemic that is unlike any other crisis we've lived over the last few years, and the resulting economic crisis is different from other crises. Partly because this has played to a sense of insecurity, our sense of vulnerability, and it has increased the already growing inequalities in our society by hitting the weak more than the strong. So it's absolutely imperative in the short term, and I think the government is doing, and Europe is doing a good job of making sure that no one is left behind, that social cohesion is prioritized, and we have a social dimension to our policy. Having said that, we don't have the luxury of focusing only on today and now. There are huge transformations happening in the world, driven by climate change, driven by digitalization, driven by changing geopolitics, and they have in some ways, as was pointed out, already have been accelerated by the pandemic. So at the same time as we manage the crisis, it is not too late, it is not too early to invest heavily in our future. And I would like to propose 2 points in these opening remarks. A, that the outlook, there are several reasons to be optimistic about the outlook for Greek industry. And second, that outlook, positive outlook, will not translate into success automatically. We will have to earn success, and it will not be easy. So let me give you 10 reasons to be optimistic. It's like a top 10 list for an American show. 10 reasons to be optimistic about Greek industry. The first was already pointed out by the minister. Greek industry turned out to be very resilient during the crisis, with production almost flat. Second reason to be optimistic, industrial exports actually increased during the year from Greece, pointing towards a gradual reconnecting of Greek industry with a more extroverted Greek industry with what's happening internationally. Third reason to be optimistic is that we have a small but rapidly growing startup community in Greece. 10 years ago, there was nothing. Right now, there is a rough estimate that startup companies in Greece are worth at least 4 billion. We had a joint event just a few days ago between SEV and Endeavor called Innovative Greeks. More than 10,000 people from inside and outside Greece signed up on that platform to help drive the innovation and the startup community in Greece. There's a lot going on in that field. Fourth reason to be optimistic, value-added foreign direct investment. The importance of investments such as the ones made by Microsoft recently, or a little further back by Pfizer in Thessaloniki, or 2 years ago when Daimler acquired Taxibit in Greece and set up a local hub. Those investments not only bring jobs and needed foreign direct investment, but they create an upskilling. They bring skills, they bring capacities, and they have a multiplier effect that can spill over to the rest of the industry and the rest of the economy. Fifth reason to be optimistic, the Green Deal, Europe's ambition to be the first climate neutral continent by 2050. If we play our cards right, it's an advantage for Greece. We have a good location. We can be one of the leaders in green energy. And there are also other opportunities in areas such as batteries, food. Sixth reason to be optimistic, global supply chains are being reconfigured as the globalization game changes. And these open opportunities for Greek companies to enter into clusters and supply relationships that they were excluded to for years. There's already some relationships being rebuilt, for example, in the metal sector between Greece and German auto manufacturers. There are many other, I think Boehringer is building a big facility in Greece to export pharma from Greece. So there's several opportunities around that area. Seventh reason to be optimistic: financing is going to be available in a way that we haven't gotten used to the last 10 years or so. The recovery fund, the regional funds will make investing more easy. Eighth reason to be optimistic: COVID has accelerated our digitalization. The Greek public sector has made huge strides in digitalizing. Greek companies, individuals are also catching up. Our infrastructure is improving. Ninth reason to be optimistic: we've got talent. Greece had 26% of graduates in Greece are in STEM area: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. That's one of the 5 or 6 highest in the world as a percentage. The quality is good. We can work with that raw material. And 10th, and perhaps the most important reason to be optimistic, is that our mindset as a society is gradually changing from viewing industry as part of the problem that has to be dealt with as more as part of the solution if we are to build sustainable growth with well-paying jobs. And it's not across the board, the whole society, but it's fairly widespread. So all of these things are wonderful, but being born with the right genes, the right body, does not make you an Olympic athlete. You have to work on being an Olympic athlete. You have to put hard work of training and do a lot to get there. So there's clearly a lot that need to be do. We have to increase our capacity to innovate, not only in the tech sector, but across the whole economy. We have to devise an industrial policy along the line of the European industrial policy that goes together with a climate change policy, and that helps Greek industry and European industry remain competitive as we transition. We have to work on our energy transition in a way that provides competitive energy costs to individuals and companies. We have to keep pushing for reforms and not use COVID as an excuse to slow down our reforms. We have to change radically the way we educate our young people. We have to upskill in artificial intelligence. Only 4% of Greek companies use artificial intelligence versus 40% in Europe. We have to continue building our infrastructure. We need bigger companies because we need companies that have the size to compete internationally, to invest in research and development, to invest in growing and developing their people. And we need to bring the universities and business closer and obviously attract more foreign direct investment. I would like to end, and sorry if I went a bit long, but I would like to end with a reflection on optimism and pessimism, as Dr. Russwurm did. Years ago, during the previous crisis, one of our engineers in one of our budget meetings, instead of giving us many numbers, put the picture of a glass on the screen, which was half full of water. And underneath, he wrote, the pessimist sees the glass half empty, the optimist sees the glass half full, the engineer sees a glass that's twice as big as it needs to be. So my conclusion is, it doesn't matter whether we're optimistic or pessimistic. We need to swim, and we need to swim fast, and I think we have the raw materials to be successful.
Thank you. So I believe we have put lots of cards on the table. And let's try to go a little bit deeper now. Let me start with asking, if I may, each one of you to address some of the fears I have when going forward, and then we can think about the closer details of various parts of industry. But first thing I want to get out of the way, or clarify for everybody who listens to this conversation. Should I think, what is your completely personal view and your federation's point of view? Are we essentially done with the pandemic? And should we think that end of the spring, this is going to be part of history? And then we just invest and create jobs and we export and we trade? or is this going to be with us for many months or maybe even a couple of years? Dimitri, since you were last, let's start first. What is your sense? What is the way you operate? That we are done with the problem or not?
I don't have a crystal ball and I'm not a specialist. So please take anything I say with a grain of salt. My sense is that we're not done. We will have to live with some repercussions of the pandemic for quite a bit longer. That does not mean that we will not be able to make big strides towards normalcy, towards something that feels more like normality within a fairly short period of time. We will go from wondering whether we have enough capacity to inject to having plenty very soon. The systems will be scaled up and there will be enough population that have been injected. So I think the mentality, the outlook our approach will change fairly soon, but I don't think we'll get back to normal in the short term. We will have to live with a different reality for a while longer.
And what is the German Federation's view on that? That the problem will be history by this summer, or it will be affecting our economy for a while?
I tend to share the view of Mr. Papalexopoulos. We will have a very difficult time during the next 3 to 4 months, but then there will be a tail effect where we will have a discussion of those 20, 25, 30% of our people who are skeptical about vaccination, and we'll have to see the consequence of that. So for the lack of better projections, I share the statement of our Federal Chancellor Merkel, and she said, well, until end of summer, we would have overcome that problem. So a difficult summer to be ahead of us.
Since you mentioned vaccination, let me ask more like an operational question. At the factory level or the level of the offices, how much disruption has there been for the German industry? In other words, is the disruption in the industry primarily coming from the demand side, that the world is not buying how much it was buying, or is it also a matter of disruption on the production process because people get sick, or because of higher costs so that people don't get sick?
Well, let me try a differentiated answer. In spring and early summer 2020, it was disruption for many reasons: logistics chains, lack of demand as around the globe, sales of significant goods were going down. We have recovered nicely. German industry has nicely recovered. The production level currently is by and large on par to a pre-pandemic level. The worry that I have is that creativity and innovation has suffered. You know, administration you can do in a home office. And frankly, people who are working from their inbox to their outbox, it doesn't make that much of a difference whether they sit in the cubicle of an office building or at home. The sheer blue-collar manufacturing working on products has been held up by a lot of investment of the companies and hygiene concepts in the manufacturing. But there is more to an industrial plant. There is the discussion about innovation, about good ideas on how to bring different strings and ends towards one focal point. And this is what we are lacking. People sitting together. Honestly, in my industrial career, the best ideas came up when we were standing at a coffee table and were discussing different thoughts. So the biggest risk that I see is a lack of creativity, a delay of creativity and innovation now of a year, which we have to fight against.
That's actually quite an interesting viewpoint, because a lot of what we have been hearing the last few months is that the crisis accelerated innovation or technology in various ways, made everything more digital and so on and so forth. But now you are saying that innovation involves a lot more. And I don't know if this is consistent with the spirit of what you discussed, but at least for a lot of the Greek industry, which is not actually huge in size with global standards, what is important is that you are close to the customers, and close even in a physical sense. You go there, you talk to them, you visit their facilities, you interact almost on a daily basis, and then you effectively co-develop the products and then the next waves. And you're saying that this is now lagging, which may mean that we will see a sort of productivity slowdown in various ways.
Well, definitely a risk towards global competitiveness. And not to be misunderstood, there has been a lot of creativity to deal with the crisis, to deal with all the hindrances, and a lot of incremental things have been improved, remote service and alike. But the real breakthrough innovations that guarantee for a long-term global competitiveness, this is what worries me.
Before we get Mr. Papalexopoulos' view on this, and I'm sure he will have a very interesting view, how much of that has to do with the fact that the German industry, that a significant part of the German industry is oriented to China or to Asia, and there is now, in addition to the physical distance, there is all sorts of other communication difficulties?
Well, on the short run, it was a positive. The early recovery of China and the surrounding countries has helped a lot. On the long run, you're pointing exactly to the right target. We will have to fight for a share in the Asian market via global competitiveness. And that is the big exercise that lies ahead of us.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Papalexopoulos, your view on this could innovation actually be lagging behind because of the channel that was just described?
I share the views already expressed. I think companies are better designed to cope with disruption than countries. So it is much more difficult to cope in the short term with a disruption of this nature as a country than as a company, because companies are designed to create algorithms, to create protocols, to create projects and run them efficiently. And I think what we have found out, much to our surprise, is that we were able to adapt as industry, as companies, to these unforeseen circumstances better than expected. We digitalized, we work from home, we improved communication. One of the positive side effects of this whole story, at least in my experience, is that we have finally all are on time. Because it used to be you had the meeting, you showed up 20 minutes late, most of us, many of us, including me. Now the Zoom meeting starts at 17:01, you have to be there, otherwise it starts without you. So there's many positive effects, and as I said earlier, we have also become far more digitally enabled. We broke some taboos and moved forward faster. Having said all that, the biggest strength of a company that results in innovation is, I think, what Dr. Russwurm indirectly talked about, which is a culture of the company. So that culture of getting together, exchanging ideas, and having the kind of communication that enables ideas to be exchanged. And there, my experience at least is that the last few months, we have lost some of that edge. We are consuming culture. We are leveraging the culture we had in the past to make sure we deal with a crisis. But the kind of interaction that really generates new ideas and big ideas and moves us forward becomes more difficult.
Just to jump in on this, you know, what many companies say is that people that have been working in the company like for many years, when they go to the digital world and they interact, maybe they are fine. But now think of perhaps you're trying to hire somebody new, and you want to integrate them into the business culture, it is much, much harder. You know, we are all hiring people that we have never actually physically seen, and this is this may be difficult. But Dimitri, in terms of the actual production capacity, do you sense that in the Greek industry there has been a disruption? You know, as an economist in the early months of the crisis, I thought it would be, but then when I was talking with various heads of at least the large businesses, they said, you know, it's difficult, but we are managing. It might have helped actually, and that the Greek industry went through very difficult 10 years, and they have become lean and mean. But have you seen a disruption in the last year, either on the labor side or the funding side or the supply side?
I think we had a similar experience as mentioned earlier with Germany. So we had an uncertainty-related slowdown, say in the first half, the second quarter of last year, and then demand quickly came back, and we came back to something resembling normality much faster than we expected. But again, let me come back to my opening remark, which is this depends very strongly on the sector. Previous crises we lived through, the misery was shared across the board to some extent. Now we have sectors that are -80, -90%, and we have sectors that most of industry that hasn't felt the impact. So it's an unfair question because it varies a lot company by company and sector by sector.
And what you say, to be honest, partly explains the relatively small decline overall in the Greek industry. For instance, the exports of food, items, medicine, etc., held quite well. And this is a very significant part of the Greek industry, whereas we don't actually export that much to countries like China that they are now growing. Let's turn now that we got this in some sense out of the way. I really want to focus on the next day. And the next day, let me put it in a, because the notion of competitiveness was mentioned. And I see we have also the minister back with us. So we lost the connection for a couple of minutes. But let me throw a question and see who might want to address this first. From certain angles of looking at the economies, if you compare Europe with what has been happening in the United States and in Asia, we have been making progress with the pandemic, but not as much. You know, Asia is now out of the problem in some sense, much faster. Is it simply because they got in first? So first in, first out? Is it something else? We also see that the US was hit quite hard because the measures they took against the pandemic were not as strict as in Europe. But we also see a lot of dynamic reaction in their labor markets. Unemployment went down a lot, but it seemed like now lots of companies are hiring again. So is there a fear, before we discuss Germany versus Greece, because it's not the same story, is it a fear that Europe may come out of this crisis less competitive? And if there is such, what can we do? Is the recovery fund the solution? I threw the question for whoever wants to try first.
Nobody's talking. Let me try this.
For reasons of courtesy, I don't take the floor.
Mr. Minister, please take the floor.
I will leave Mr. Papalexopoulos first, just for courtesy reasons.
No, it is primarily an economic policy matter, what we can do for competitiveness in Europe, so that we don't end up being behind the Asia and the America.
I think I will be very honest with you, Mr. Vettas. When I was Minister of Health, I remember it now as I was hearing what you were saying. I was in a conference in Rome about the investments in the health sector in the European Union. And it was one Japanese guy from a big fund, and he was trying to explain how they look Europe. So they said, when we see the United States, we look something like that. And he put in the floor one beautiful woman, middle-aged, very well-looking. When we see Asia, we look something like that. And he put in the floor one very beautiful young woman, very, very sexy. And when we see Europe, we look that. And he showed a cemetery. So we're all very shocked why they were looking at European Union as a cemetery for investment reasons. He just explained that everything in Europe goes very slow, innovation goes very slow, bureaucracy is very heavy, and for these reasons, most of these funds wouldn't look to invest in Europe, but they would like to invest in the United States or to Asia. At that time, I thought this was too much. I thought it was over-exaggerated. But during the pandemic crisis, I think everybody in Europe realized that our industry was deeply stand on Asia and other markets, and we weren't able to self-sustain ourselves in all the critical things our civilians desperately wanted. And this was, I think, a shock for everybody in the European Union. Everybody realized that this idea of putting industry in other places just to be more competitive and leave these critical areas out of European production, when we really needed it, it was an ugly truth that we had to realize. So I think all governments, for sure, and the Greek government, but I'm sure the German government also, and all main European countries' governments realize that this is something that we have to find a way out. And we have to support our industry in a much more hard way in order to help our industries to be much more competitive in the world market. We want to have production line in European Union. We want to help innovation in European Union, and we have to use our resources for this reason. As for Greece, because I can speak for Greece more, we are totally dedicated to a course, and Mr. Papalexopoulos, I think he knows that very well, to use the recovery fund funding and the European funding of the next years to come in a much more proper way to help industry. And we say this publicly. We made these proposals in the European institutions in a very, I think, professional way, and we took very good comments from their side. And we believe that this is a time to re-establish real industry in European Union and in Greece. Greece, you know that until the 80s was a good industrial power, but under the 80s it was totally destroyed. And we became an economy just for services, tourism and services. Now we know that this was a bad choice. Tourism is good, services are good, but the real economy has to have industry in between. With no industry, you cannot have a real serious economy. And this is what we think, and in the European level, we have to examine in a very, very serious way. Thank you.
Thank you. So on this same topic, so the minister added to my question about competitiveness trends in Europe relative to the rest of the world. This obvious tendency that we see to bring some of the production closer to home, whether this is medicine or food. But how do these things are sitting together? Should we think that the global supply chains will become simpler? Should we think that if German industry wants to design a mechanical parts, now this is no longer going to be produced in Indonesia, but perhaps somewhere closer like Greece?
Well,
let me turn to the German view first.
Well, we will see more diverse supply chains or supply networks, to be more exact. The pendulum has swung too far. This is what we have learned. The sheer cost optimization with creating scales, putting all eggs into one basket, and be it a Chinese one or a Vietnamese one, that has shown its consequences. So we will see more diverse supply networks. I'm not necessarily convinced that we will see a reshoring if it's too costly, because the one parameter is resilience. Yes, we want to have more resilience. The other, resilience is like an insurance. If the premium is too high, it's getting a tricky math to do that. So,
and actually, if I may ask you, and sorry for interrupting, the incentives might be different at the level of a country for economic policy, and different at the level for a business. A business may like to outsource if it is cheaper to outsource.
Yeah, but then,
so are you suggesting that economic policy or industrial policy specifically in Europe should become more protectionist? Is it a matter of, for instance, lowering energy cost? Is it a matter of pushing harder for innovation and research and development? What would be the priorities from your viewpoint?
Well, unfortunately, there is not one silver bullet. We have to use the whole portfolio of things. The good news is that innovation will make a lot of production less labor dependent. So the classical labor cost bargaining will be reduced. I'm sure about that. On the other hand, in supply networks spanning all over the globe, we will have more options to buy, and these things come together. The role of government, I'm an absolute fan of free markets, is to unleash industry, to let companies do the best decisions. I'm not a fan of protectionism. Europe lives from export. We always have to see that. If we take the math for Europe as a whole, or the European Union, we are an export region. So we should be extremely careful about protectionism. It may fire back badly. It's more about smart solutions, and maybe also a different math that risks get a price tag, and companies then will consider certain decisions under the assumption, well, if I optimize for best cost, it goes with the risk. The risk is real, and the next pandemic or the next disruption may occur. It's not just an artificial concept, it is real. So that may change and will definitely change the decision-making in companies towards more resilient networks. Having said that, production in Europe will only be sustainable if it is truly competitive. State subsidies or European subsidies will not be sustainable on the long run. As much as it's appreciated that the European Union helps companies through the crisis, if that's a bridging, that's fine. If that bridge has no other end, it's a pier and not a bridge, and that's not a sustainable building.
You opened up a couple of things to which I will certainly like to return, but let's see the view that Mr. Papalexopoulos may have on this. I know he has been following very carefully what's going on in the US, in Asia, and it's interesting that even this COVID-19 thing certainly hasn't killed globalization, but has it changed priorities? And does it seem that Europe, that has been lagging in productivity relative to the US and many Asian countries before the crisis, may get out of the crisis even at a slower pace?
I would argue to your question that if we look back 5 or 10 years from now, the effect that COVID will have had on Europe's relative position in the world will not have been very important. What is really much more important is how we handle the digitalization, how we handle the Green Deal, and these are going to have a far bigger and more lasting impact in either improving Europe's position in the world or not. We are all, I think, here free marketeers who believe in the free market and its ability to create wealth and growth and jobs, and we want to avoid protectionism. On the other hand, the world has become a lot more complicated. We have a China with a state-driven capitalism, which doesn't always use free market criteria. We have an America which has taken a clear lead in some technology platforms that gives it leverage and is increasingly thinking of itself. And within that context, Europe has to carve out a position that is will allow it to remain competitive and have a position in the world. And just saying, if I may be allowed, that we don't want to avoid protectionism is true, but is not sufficient to prepare us for what's coming. A very good example, and I don't know if you want to go there yet, is the Green Deal. Because we as SEV, and I think as proud Europeans and Greeks, support the Commission's ambition to make Europe the first climate neutral continent by 2050. It's not only the right thing to do, also if done right, it will also make Europe more competitive as well. But the key point there is if done right, because if we proceed with a climate policy, with an ambitious climate policy, without an industrial policy and an energy policy to complement them, then we risk shooting ourselves in the foot, losing jobs without improving the environment. But that's a whole different discussion, I think.
It is a different discussion, but I want to allocate a minute or two on that. Because if you read any type of Commission document, there will be at least 3 times on the cover page, Green Deal. And there are obviously some non-economic priorities that are very important. Not everything in life is about money. So, protecting the environment by itself is important. But as Mr. Papalexopoulos said, it has to be done right. And is your view that we are doing this right? And perhaps here there may be a different level at which the Greek industry and the German industry are ready for this. In Greece, we are primarily importers of some of the new technologies, or not? But let's see the German view. Is there a consensus that Germany should walk down this green line all the way?
Well, there is a consensus in German industry that we need to work for our climate. There is no doubt, and the German entrepreneurs, with very, very few exceptions, as usual, they support the Paris goals. However, it is about the discussion how to come there. And as Mr. Papalexopoulos used the example of a sportsman, if you have a trainer that just lifts the bar and doesn't discuss with the sportsman he trains on how to get over the bar, simply lifting the bar wouldn't make that sportsman any better in the contest. So we have to discuss on a European level about the way forward to achieve these goals. Because if we fail, if that leads to deindustrialization, then Europe won't be the example for the rest of the world. And there are a lot of regions around the globe who are carefully watching the European example. If we are successful in turning our economy into a truly climate neutral one without giving up the standard of living, then this can be a masterpiece for the rest of the globe, but it cuts both ways. If we fail, then this approach will not be a credible one for the rest of the globe.
Since you brought up this possibility of failure, and Mr. Papalexopoulos also before you, help me see how I should be thinking of this. Is the transition to a greener Europe something that we have to do for environmental reasons and for our children, but it comes at a cost? Or is it also an opportunity to lead to a more dynamic economy?
Both is true. It comes with a cost. There is no free lunch. And carbon-free energy in all means will be more expensive. And be it for distribution. And even as the wind blows for free, you need the installation, you need the networks, you need the transport from one region to the other. The answer may differ for a country like Greece that has the opportunity of renewable energies in its own borders, whereas a country like Germany that currently imports 70% of its total gross energy demand will have a hard time. We can't build that many windmills, we can't build that many solar plants to get self-sufficient. So energy in Germany, in Middle Europe, will become more expensive, and we will have to overcompensate via smart innovation. Otherwise, it gets more expensive, and then we are back to social cohesion that Mr. Papalexopoulos also mentioned. Will travel, will holiday travel to Greece only be a privilege to people that are rich? Will individual mobility only be a privilege to those people who can afford?
So you are saying that going to a greener Europe should not come at a higher cost of energy for the average European?
Or at smart mechanisms to make that palpable?
Actually, let me say one thing and then turn to the minister and to Mr. Papalexopoulos on exactly this question of how the Greek industry can benefit from the transition to the green economy, which is a matter of energy, but it's also lots of other things. But one thing that perhaps I should convey to you is that, I don't know if you know this, Greece is actually has set a plan for the next 10 years where the decarbonization process is one of the fastest among all the European economies. We are running much faster than what the goals that we have to adhere to due to the Commission rules are. So we are doing, in some sense, more than our share.
Mm-hmm.
And my view is that the government is doing this not only because we have to be good global citizens as Greeks, but because it sees an opportunity that this is going to be a more dynamic part of the economy. And I don't know if Mr. Papalexopoulos or the minister would like to go first on this, on how exactly this transition to green.
I would like to take the floor of that. Okay, exactly as you said, Nikos, Greece has decided, the Greek government, to decarbonize our energy sector until 2023. Only one product line until 2027. And in order to achieve that, we changed all our legislation about licensing the renewable energy, and we still do. We try to import to Greece all the most new efficient technology in renewable energy in various sectors, and in wind and in solar power, and in hydrogen. We try to be together with the European Union in IPCEI's project as batteries and everything. We give incentives about companies to come and invest in these sectors. Until now, there is a very big interest from various companies around the world to come and invest in this sector in Greece. And we believe that Greece, a country with big sunshine all over the year, and a lot of places, and in the Aegean with a lot of wind, we can have some advantages in this kind of energy sector. And this time we want to use this advantage. We want to really take something from this advantage and not just talk about it. Because, you know, I'm sure in Germany they have had this from Greece many, many times in the past. But now we want to deliver. I want to say that we already signed with IOBE a very big deal in West Macedonia region for a big solar power investment, more than €1 billion, and this is fantastic news for us. Now we're going to license wind power windmills into the sea, offshore, and we are going to license solar power into lakes, which are very new technology and very efficient, and we're entering very fast into the IPCIs of hydrogen, which we think it's also something that we have to look at in the future, and for the storage region of the renewable energy, which is, let's say, the biggest challenge. So, yes, Nick, we took the decision because we believe that we want to fight the climate change and follow the Paris Agreement goals and the European Commission goals, but not only for that. We believe that for our economy, it could be in the future be a very vital sector that would create jobs and would attract foreign direct investments.
Nico, two observations here, if I may, to what the minister said. I think to your original question, over the long run, it's clearly also economically advantageous to go to renewable sources. But over the next, say, 20 years or so, there will be significant additional costs in terms of investment. So that is, it's not, there's no free lunch, as was said earlier. Having said that, I would also like to point out, because the minister was kind enough to bring up earlier the importance of industry, that the transition is not only a matter of dealing with the impact on the energy markets, but also on industry. So if you look at Europe's ambition to reduce emissions by 55% until 2030, and you compare with Turkey, which is very close to us, and has a goal, according to the Paris Agreement, to double its emissions to 2030, I think we have, over the next few years, the risk of an uneven playing field. On the one hand, in Greece and in Europe, we are correctly investing in a clean future and shouldering the cost. On the other hand, a big part of the rest of the world, and I'm using Turkey as an example because what is exactly next to us, is continuing along the same path as it was up to now. That has a risk, unless we put the rules of the game correctly, without being protectionist, but being very careful about creating what's called a level playing field, a fair competition, to make sure that energy-intensive industries in Europe and Greece, and energy production in Greece and Europe as well, can compete, and we don't export jobs and export pollution instead of reducing pollution and increasing jobs.
And any ideas how we can make sure that the field is level? Because not the rest of not everybody in the rest of the world has to follow what Brussels says.
That is a discussion that is active in Brussels now. There is discussion of a so-called carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is supposed to work in that direction. Although what I'm afraid is happening is that increasingly that is viewed as a revenue opportunity tax revenue opportunity for Europe, rather than a mechanism to create a level playing field. So this is an active policy discussion, and I think it's a very important one for European industry, for Greek industry.
And that's what I meant with we have to discuss the way forward, the process. The goals are set and undisputed, but we have to find smart ways how to reach them. And this is a very concrete, actual discussion that we as industry have been part of. And Dimitri, on your 10 reasons why to be optimistic, I sometimes frowned why I wouldn't count them for Germany. The status of understanding that a green transition can only go with industry and not against industry. That's something that we in Germany still have to work on.
So as we gradually have to be wrapping things up, because our time is getting a little bit over, let's try to be a little bit more closer to things to do. Okay, so we discussed some of the challenges, we discussed many of the opportunities, but if I put together the fact that part of the industry has to come back from the rest of the world closer to Europe, that's one. Second of all, the need to invest a lot in changing the way we deal with energy. We didn't even open up the discussion about cars, which is huge, not only for Europe, for Germany, but for the rest of the European industry, if things have to change. But if things are changing, what might be opportunities? And now I'm going to bring in more my fears about the Greek industry. The Greek industry, Mr. Papalexopoulos, I hope you will agree, has opportunities but needs to move fast. We cannot just wait. And are there opportunities to collaborate with more of the core industrial countries like Europe, like Germany, in Europe, so that we have perhaps shorter but more efficient supply chains?
If that question is addressed to me, let me perhaps say a few words and ask both the Minister and Siegfried to add to that. As was pointed out by Minister Georgiadis earlier, for many years, for a number of reasons, Greek industry was reduced and cut off from the mainstream of global industry and European industry. Increasingly, industry is built around clusters, knowledge clusters, supply chain clusters. And somehow you have to be part of that to be able to be part of the global chain. And now there are opportunities in a number of ways to reestablish, and in some cases that's already actively happening, those clusters. There are, and I'll give you some examples. That these are not meant to be exhaustive by any means, but in the pharma industry, I mentioned earlier, Boehringer, the German company, is building a big production plant in Greece, which will have exports of about 1 billion a year when completed. I know several Greek suppliers who are talking to the German auto industry to supply not only simple metal components, but also other materials, batteries, and things like that. There is a whole discussion on the tech industry. I mentioned the example, for example, of Daimler buying TaxiBeat and building a hub, a regional hub here. There are several opportunities also around green energy. The minister mentioned IOBE and PPC coming together. We can help Germany supply its energy import needs in a clean way going forward, provided, of course, Europe helps us and Greece helps itself provide the interconnection, so we have a European energy industry, energy market, which we don't yet. So yes, there are many opportunities, and again, these are only some examples, food or other examples as well, where we can work closer with German companies in Germany, we can work closer with Europe, and I think there are signs that we're moving in that direction. We need to move faster, you're right.
I would like to close this with the minister, but so before he gets the floor, from the German viewpoint, does it look like collaborating with the Greek industry appears an attractive option? Are there opportunities? And actually, not to just identify that much Greece and Germany, but do we expect we're going to see a lot more efficient collaboration in Europe amongst industry? Or is there a fear that as the recession will not be undone in just a couple of months, there may be more like national policies and larger economies will actually try to boost more their own companies? I hope not.
Well, you can be sure that amongst industrialists all over Europe, there is a clear understanding that only if we team up, we have any chance to compete with the polars like China and its surroundings, or the United States or the NAFTA for that sake. So there is an overwhelming understanding that we Europe have to team up. Will there be competition within Europe? For sure. There is a market within Europe and we will compete for that. But on a global scale, there is enough motivation to collaborate and use the best ingredients of every region. The sheer fact of a long-standing STEM tradition in Greece, of a young generation of excellently educated people around technology, and a tradition of old-timers like us, I dare to say, that can help and bring their tacit knowledge to that new generation. This is a wonderful ingredient to bring to the party, not to talk about energy alone. The sunshine and the wind is a good opportunity, don't get me wrong. And from a German perspective, I would prefer to buy megawatts from Greece in terms of clean energy rather than the same amount of energy from Saudi Arabia in terms of crude oil. But I don't want to reduce Greece to an energy harvesting country only. There is a heck of a lot of technological expertise. There are great universities in Greece with a STEM background. So I see Greece as a partner, as an opportunity, and obviously many Middle European companies see it the same way.
I think the minister will hire you to promote Greece's interests abroad.
And I'm sure that we have been discussing the green economy stuff as just one of the possibilities, and an important one. But for instance, what is going on and what will happen in the next many years in the healthcare sector,
absolutely,
this also is a huge opportunity. So perhaps the minister, before I go with a round of very final questions, can give us a final view of what might be reasons for optimism for the Greek industry, and what specifically more the ministry is doing to help that.
Okay, let me make some comments and then I have to leave you because I have a very heavy schedule. It was a little bit a lot of time for me. First of all, I wouldn't like to promote Greece just as a place for renewable energy and wind and solar. I just wanted to make a comment about how we can use this part of our economy to have a good chance for our economy to grow. Our main effort here in Greece is to transform our country as a whole to a much more business-friendly country. That's why we reduce taxation, social security fund contribution. We try to raise bureaucrat obstacles, make the licensing procedure go faster, etc. So our main idea is to help Greece in this new decade to be able to take back the lost ground in foreign direct investments attraction of the recent years, because we are far behind. Now is the time to go forward. I will agree, European funding cannot come forever, and this is the reason I said before that we have to use this European funding as a chance to transform our country and use it in a very wise and efficient way, because it will not be forever. If it was to be forever, then we wouldn't have to do anything important. We'll just get the money. We will get the money one-off, and we'll have to use them in a way that will product well for our country for the next 100 years. And this is a big challenge that I think this government, not only the government, I have to comment that. The good with Greece, not that we have a government very stable and pro-business and everything, but we have a society that after the experience of the left government of 2015-2019 have realized that the fundamental truths of free economy are good, the society support privatization. The society supports us when we say we want to be business friendly for the first time now. Of course, the pandemic crisis slowed down all the reforms and the effort we wanted to do. But from the other hand, it gave us the recovery fund, which, as I said before, can be used as an opportunity for the future. So we want to transform Greece to a place that having an investment makes sense. It gets you at the end earn money and to fix our reputation. Even though I have to say that the biggest investments that were done in Greece in the recent years, I will mention the Chinese investment in Piraeus Port Costco, the Deutsche Telekom investment in Hotel, and the Fraport investment in our airports. 3 of them were totally success for the investors. Costco's investment in Piraeus is their most profitable investment globally. Deutsche Telekom is very, very happy with Hotel. And the Fraport goes very well until the pandemic crisis were extremely well. Of course, under the pandemic crisis, tourist industry has been severely hit, but when we will exit the crisis, everything looking very good. So not only for renewable, my friend Siegfried, but for investment as a whole. Greece is here and it's coming back very fast. So thank you very much for the invitation. I have to leave you, very sorry.
We are actually, we are finishing. So we thank you for your time. Just let me ask 10 seconds to each. I ask you to take out your crystal ball. And now we have March of 2021. How will, in your domain, in the Greek economy or the German economy, how will March 2022 be? Minister, first.
Much better than March 2021 for sure. If it's not, we will be in a very serious trouble. So I'm sure it will be much, much better. Our life will be back. The pandemic crisis will be over until March 22. And we will working very hard to go forward.
And the German economy, how will it look in March 2022?
I can only agree to the minister, and I hope that the German economy will follow the Greek example.
Dimitri, last word.
How can I possibly contradict the 2 previous speakers? I think we're all optimistic and we have reasons to be optimistic.
Okay, I would like to warmly thank you all. I believe we got deep into many issues. We touched upon some others. And it's going to be a very interesting next several months. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All the best. Bye.